For 20 years, Elijah Brown arrived at Hampton and First National Bank every Tuesday, respected by all who knew his quiet generosity and lifelong integrity. Today, something changed. A young teller's suspicious glance, a manager's cold dismissal, and suddenly the 76-year-old widower found himself branded a thief in front of a lobby full of onlookers. As security escorted him into the rain, his walking cane clattered to the floor. A humiliation captured on a phone and shared across social media within hours. What no one at the bank realized was that the elderly black man they'd disgraced had a son who had disappeared 30 years ago, reinventing himself as someone new. In his luxurious penthouse, billionaire tech mogul D. Westfield, born Andre Brown, stared at the viral video of his father's mistreatment, a father he'd abandoned but never forgotten. The same disciplined hands that had once taught him carpentry now trembled in public shame. Andre's expression hardened as he reached for his phone. "I want the bank. All of it. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss." The morning light filtered through the tattered curtains as Elijah Brown's eyes opened at precisely 5 a.m. just as they had for the past 40 years. No alarm clock needed. His body knew the routine by heart. He slowly sat up on the edge of his bed, feeling the familiar ache in his knees that had become his constant companion in recent years. The empty space beside him still felt wrong, even after all this time. His weathered hand gently brushed over Martha's pillow, the indent long gone but the memory still vivid. "Good morning, sweetheart," he whispered to the silence, a ritual that brought him both pain and comfort. Elijah shuffled to the kitchen in his worn slippers, filling the kettle with water and placing it on the stove. He prepared Martha's favorite tea, chamomile with a touch of honey, just as she liked it. He never drank it himself. The cup would sit untouched on the table while he sipped his black coffee, allowing himself to imagine her presence across from him. The small kitchen table by the window offered a view of the awakening neighborhood. Elijah opened his worn Bible, its pages soft and yellowed from decades of daily reading. His large fingers, once strong and nimble from years of carpentry, now moved slowly as they traced the familiar verses that had guided him through life's hardest moments. When the clock struck 6, Elijah dressed carefully in pressed khaki pants and a button-up shirt, the same outfit he wore each Tuesday for his weekly trip to the bank. He combed his silver hair neatly to the side, splashed on a touch of the aftershave Martha had given him for their last anniversary together, and checked his reflection in the mirror. "Looking presentable today, old man," he said with a small smile, adjusting his collar. His daughter-in-law had once offered to buy him new clothes, but Elijah preferred the comfort of the familiar. These clothes had history. They carried the memories of countless Tuesdays past. The morning air held a slight chill as Elijah stepped outside, locking his front door carefully behind him. His doctor had suggested he use a cane for stability, and though his pride had initially resisted, the wooden walking stick had become an extension of himself. It was hand-carved, a hobby he'd taken up to fill the quiet evenings. His first stop was always Wilson's Bakery, a small family-owned shop that had weathered the neighborhood's changes over the decades. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, filling his lungs with the heavenly scent of fresh bread. "Mr. Brown." "Right on time as always," called out Betty Wilson from behind the counter. Her face, lined with laugh wrinkles, brightened at the sight of him. "The usual?" "Morning, Betty. Yes, 2 rolls today, please." Elijah's voice was deep and melodious, softened by age but still carrying the warmth that had made him a beloved figure in the community. Betty carefully placed 2 freshly baked rolls in a paper bag. "How's that garden of yours coming along?" "The tomatoes are giving me trouble this year," Elijah replied, fishing exact change from his wallet. "But the zucchini's growing like it's trying to take over the world." Betty laughed. "Bring me some next week, would you? My grandson loves that zucchini bread I make." Elijah nodded, accepting the warm bag with a smile. "Will do. You have yourself a blessed day now." Back on the sidewalk, Elijah continued his leisurely pace toward downtown. The neighborhood had changed, dramatically over the decades. Newer buildings stood beside the old. Chain stores had replaced many family businesses, and many faces were unfamiliar. But some things remained constant, like Frank, the homeless man who sat on the same corner every morning. "Morning, Frank," Elijah greeted, handing him one of the fresh rolls. Frank's weathered face crinkled into a smile. "Mr. B, right on time. You're better than any clock." He accepted the roll with grateful hands. "How's that knee treating you today?" "Can't complain," Elijah replied, though they both knew he could. "Going to rain later. I can feel it." "Then I better find myself some shelter," Frank said, taking a bite of the roll. "God bless you, Mr. B." Elijah continued his walk, nodding at familiar faces and greeting shopkeepers opening their stores for the day. At precisely 9:30 a.m., he arrived at Hampton and First National Bank, a stately brick building that had stood at the corner of Main and Jefferson Streets for over 70 years. The bank's heavy glass doors parted to welcome him into the cool, air-conditioned interior that smelled of polish and paper. Elijah had been coming to this bank every Tuesday for 20 years, depositing his pension check and withdrawing just enough cash to last the week. The routine was comforting. The familiar faces of the older tellers, Margaret and Tom, had become something like friends over the years. But today, as Elijah approached the counter, he noticed neither Margaret nor Tom was present. Instead, a young woman with sleek blonde hair and a crisp blue blazer stood behind the counter, a forced smile on her face as she helped customers. Elijah took his place in line, his pension check already filled out and signed, tucked safely in the inside pocket of his jacket. He noticed a new woman walking across the floor, her heels clicking authoritatively on the marble. She had the polished look of management, her dark hair pulled back tightly, her suit perfectly tailored. Her nameplate read, "Kendra Miles, Branch Manager." When it was finally his turn, Elijah approached the counter with a friendly smile. "Good morning," he greeted the young teller. "I haven't seen you before. Is Margaret out today?" The young woman's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Margaret retired last month. I'm Stephanie. How can I help you today?" "Oh," Elijah said, feeling a pang of loss. Margaret had never mentioned retirement. "Well, I'm here to deposit my pension check, same as every Tuesday." He carefully removed the check from his jacket and slid it across the counter along with his ID. Stephanie examined the check and his ID, her brow furrowing slightly. She typed something into her computer, then frowned deeper. "Is something wrong?" Elijah asked. "One moment, sir," Stephanie said, her voice taking on a different tone. She turned to her computer screen again, typing rapidly. "I'm sorry, but the signature on this check doesn't seem to match what we have on file." Elijah blinked in confusion. "That can't be right. I've been signing my checks the same way for 20 years. Stephanie's expression hardened slightly. "Our system is flagging it as inconsistent. I'll need to speak with my manager." Before Elijah could respond, Stephanie had turned and waved over Kendra Miles. The two women spoke in hushed tones, occasionally glancing at Elijah, who stood patiently waiting, leaning slightly on his cane. A woman in line behind him, with expertly highlighted hair and designer clothes, sighed loudly. "Some of us have places to be," she muttered, just loud enough to be heard. Kendra approached the counter with Stephanie. "Sir, there seems to be an issue with your check," she said, her voice professionally detached. "Would you mind taking a seat over there while we verify some information?" Elijah felt a knot forming in his stomach. Nothing like this had ever happened before. "I don't understand. I've been banking here for 20 years. "Please, sir," Kendra insisted, gesturing to a row of chairs against the wall. "It's just a routine verification." Reluctantly, Elijah made his way to the chairs, aware of the eyes watching him. The woman who had sighed, her name tag revealed her as Marilyn Sloan, was now at the counter, and he couldn't help but overhear her comment to Stephanie. "You can never be too careful these days," Marilyn said, her voice carrying. "These scams are getting so sophisticated. I read about one last week where they're targeting banks with fake checks." Elijah felt his face grow hot with embarrassment. The implication was clear, and several customers turned to look at him with suspicious eyes. Kendra's posture stiffened at the comment. She picked up a phone at the counter and spoke quietly, her back to the lobby. Elijah couldn't hear what she was saying, but moments later, a young Latino security guard appeared from a side door. The guard, whose nameplate read Luis Santiago, approached Kendra for instructions. He was young, probably in his early 20s, with a clean-shaven face that still held traces of boyhood. His uniform looked new and slightly too large for his frame. Kendra spoke to Luis while occasionally glancing in Elijah's direction. Luis's expression shifted from neutral to concerned as he listened. He seemed to ask a question, which Kendra answered with a firm expression before pointing toward Elijah. With visible reluctance, Luis approached where Elijah sat waiting. "Sir?" His voice cracked slightly, and he cleared his throat. "Sir, I need to speak with you." Elijah looked up, his dignity intact despite the confusion and embarrassment washing over him. "Yes, young man?" Luis shifted uncomfortably. "The manager believes there may be an issue with your check. She's asking that you leave the premises until this matter can be resolved." "Leave?" Elijah's voice remained steady, though his heart raced. "There must be some mistake. I've been a customer here for 20 years. My wife and I opened our account in 1999, and I've never had a problem before." "I understand, sir, but could you please ask them to call Tom Harrison? He's been my banker for years. He can verify who I am." Luis glanced back at Kendra, who was watching the interaction closely. "I'm sorry, sir. Mr. Harrison isn't available, and Ms. Miles has asked that you leave for now. You can come back tomorrow after they've had time to verify the check." By now, several customers were openly staring. Marilyn Sloan stood near the counter, her expression a mixture of smugness and faux concern. "I saw something about this on the news," she said loudly to another customer. "They said elderly people are being used as frontmen for fraud rings. They probably gave him a fake check to cash." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Elijah felt as though he'd been slapped. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped his cane. "I am not a thief," he said quietly, dignity in every syllable. "I worked for the city for 42 years. I've never stolen a penny in my life." Kendra stepped forward. "Sir, we're not accusing you of anything. This is just standard procedure when our system flags something suspicious. Now, if you could please leave quietly, we can sort this out later." Elijah looked around at the faces watching him, some curious, some suspicious, some deliberately looking away in discomfort. Not a single person spoke up in his defense. "I'd like to speak to someone who knows me," Elijah insisted, his voice still low but firm. "Margaret or Tom would clear this up in a minute." "They don't work here anymore," Kendra said firmly. "Now please leave before we're forced to take further action." Luis stood uncomfortably beside Elijah, clearly torn between his job duties and his sense of right and wrong. "Sir, please," he whispered, "don't make this harder." With as much dignity as he could muster, Elijah slowly rose to his feet. "I've been coming to this bank every Tuesday at the same time for 20 years, he said, his voice carrying across the now silent lobby. "My wife and I chose this bank because it claimed to care about community. Martha would be heartbroken to see this today." As Elijah turned to leave, his cane caught on the leg of the chair. He stumbled slightly, and the wooden walking stick clattered to the floor. Luis quickly bent to retrieve it, handing it back with genuine concern in his eyes. "Thank you, son," Elijah said quietly, accepting the cane. Luis escorted him to the door, opening it to reveal gray skies and the beginning of a light rain. "I'm sorry about this," Luis whispered, too low for others to hear. Elijah stepped outside, the rain immediately dampening his carefully combed hair and pressed shirt. Through the glass doors, he could see business resuming as usual, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't been publicly humiliated after decades of loyalty. Unknown to Elijah, Luis Santiago lingered by the door, watching the elderly man's dignified but defeated posture as he walked away in the rain. A knot of shame tightened in the young guard's stomach. Glancing around to ensure no one was watching, Luis pulled out his phone and discreetly recorded Elijah's retreating figure, capturing the moment when the elderly man paused at the corner, to wipe rain, or perhaps tears, from his face before continuing his journey home. Hours later, that same video appeared on social media with a simple caption. "This man has cashed checks here for 20 years. Why'd they treat him like this?" The rain had intensified by the time Elijah reached his modest home. The house felt emptier than usual as he hung his damp jacket on the hook by the door. Without bothering to turn on the lights, he made his way to the living room and sank into his old armchair. On the small table beside him sat a framed photograph, Elijah and Martha on their 40th wedding anniversary, both smiling broadly, her hand resting on his as it had for most of their lives. He picked up the picture, his fingers tracing the outline of her face. "I never thought I'd live to see this day, Martha," he whispered to the silence. "Never thought I'd be treated like a criminal in the place that's held our money since before you left me." A single tear tracked down his weathered cheek as the rain continued to beat against the windows, echoing the heaviness in his heart. The video of Elijah Brown walking away from Hampton and First National Bank in the rain spread across social media platforms like wildfire. By the following morning, it had been viewed over 2 million times, shared by celebrities, community activists, and ordinary citizens outraged by what they saw. Justice for Elijah and Hansher banking while black began trending on Twitter. News vans gathered outside the bank where protesters held signs reading "Respect our elders" and 20 years of loyalty means nothing. The bank's social media accounts were flooded with angry comments and one-star reviews. Hampton and First National Bank quickly issued a statement. "We are aware of an incident involving an elderly customer that has been shared on social media. This regrettable misunderstanding does not reflect our values or customer service standards. We are conducting a thorough internal review and have reached out to the customer to resolve this matter. Hampton and First remains committed to serving all members of our community with dignity and respect." But the damage was done. The carefully worded corporate response only fueled public outrage. At Elijah's small house, reporters gathered on the sidewalk, cameras at the ready. Neighbors tried to shield him, bringing casseroles and offering to run errands so he wouldn't have to face the media circus. But Elijah remained inside, curtains drawn, refusing all interview requests. "I'm not looking to be on television," he told his neighbor Bill when he brought over a homemade lasagna. "I'm not looking for handouts or to become some kind of symbol. I just want my dignity back, and that's something they can't give me on the news." Pride kept him quiet. The thought of becoming a charity case or having people look at him with pity was more than he could bear. He'd spent his life standing tall, working hard, and making his own way. Being thrust into the spotlight as a victim felt like another kind of humiliation. Across town at the offices of the Daily Chronicle, Editor-in-Chief Robert Nichols called Jasmine Carter into his office. At 28, Jasmine was one of the paper's rising stars, ambitious, thorough, and unafraid to tackle difficult stories. "I want you on the bank story," Nichols said without preamble, as Jasmine took a seat. "The old man in the video, everybody's talking about it, but nobody's getting the full picture. I want you to dig deeper. Who is he? What really happened? Is this an isolated incident or a pattern?" Jasmine nodded, already formulating her approach. "I'll get on it right away." What she didn't tell her editor was that she already knew exactly who Elijah Brown was. Growing up in the same neighborhood, she remembered him as Mr. Brown from Cedar Street, the kind man who fixed things for neighbors and always had peppermints in his pockets for the local children. He'd built a bookshelf for her mother when Jasmine was just 8 years old, refusing payment and instead accepting only a slice of sweet potato pie. Back at her desk, Jasmine began her research, starting with public records. Elijah Brown, 76 years old, widowed, retired from the city's public works department after 42 years of service, no criminal record, owner of the same house on Cedar Street for over 4 decades. As she dug deeper, Jasmine found herself transported back to 1987. She was interviewing childhood friends, former neighbors, and colleagues of Elijah, piecing together a portrait of the man behind the viral video. "He taught his son everything about carpentry," said William Taylor, Elijah's former co-worker. "I remember visiting their home once. Little Andre couldn't have been more than 12, but he was already building birdhouses that looked professional. Another, neighbor Grace Miller, recalled how Elijah had installed a wheelchair ramp for her husband after his stroke. Wouldn't take a dime, she told Jasmine. Said it was what neighbors do. Spent 3 weekends getting it just right, making sure it was sturdy and safe. The more Jasmine uncovered, the clearer the picture became. Elijah Brown was a pillar of the community, a man who raised his son with firm but loving guidance after his wife's early death from cancer, a man who believed in hard work, honesty, and helping others. But where was his son now? Andre Brown seemed to have vanished from public records after the age of 18. Jasmine's research led her to a dusty high school yearbook from 1993. There, she found a photo of teenage Andre Brown, tall, serious-faced, with the same dignified features as his father. The caption under his senior photo read, "Most likely to change the world." Through interviews with Andre's former classmates, a story of tension began to emerge. Andre had been brilliant, driven, but also increasingly frustrated by what he saw as his father's simple life and modest ambitions. They had this big fight junior year, recalled Marcus Wilson, Andre's former friend. Andre got accepted to this fancy summer program at some Ivy League school, but they couldn't afford it. Mr. Brown suggested he work at the hardware store instead. Learn practical skills. Andre was furious. Said he wasn't going to spend his life fixing things for people who looked down on him. The rift had widened over time. While Elijah believed in quiet dignity, honest work, and community connection, Andre hungered for recognition, wealth, and a different kind of respect. The last time I saw them together was graduation, another classmate told Jasmine. Andre got this big scholarship. His dad was proud but kept saying things like, "Stay humble" and "Remember where you come from." Andre just looked distant, like he was already gone, and gone he was. At 18, Andre Brown had left home, and apparently left his identity behind as well. Meanwhile, in a sleek high-rise penthouse overlooking the city skyline, a man known to most as D. Westfield sat behind a massive glass desk, reviewing quarterly projections. At 49, he projected power and confidence, designer suit perfectly tailored to his tall frame, his closely cropped hair showing distinguished touches of gray at the temples. The intercom buzzed, and his mild-eyed assistant's voice came through. "Mr. Westfield, I think there's something you should see." Moments later, the assistant entered with a tablet and placed it before him. "This video is going viral. I thought you should be aware. D. Westfield, or Andre Brown,
and the subterranean and the later discipline and Malibu in the redefinition cigarette. How many is that cycle that he gives?
Though it had been decades since he'd seen him, Andre instantly recognized his father. His face remained impassive, betraying nothing to his assistant. "Thank you, Tracy. That will be all." When the door closed, Andre rewound the video and watched it again, and again, and again. Each viewing sent a fresh wave of emotions through him: shock, anger, and something deeper that he'd worked hard to bury: shame. For hours, Andre sat alone in his office, the city lights coming alive outside his window as evening fell. The video had unlocked a flood of memories he'd spent years suppressing: his father's hands guiding his own on a piece of wood, his father's voice reading bedtime stories, his father standing alone at his graduation while other kids had too, parents to cheer for them. Tracy knocked and entered again. "Sir, I've been thinking about that video. We could make an anonymous donation to the man, or perhaps fund a legal team to—" "No," Andre cut her off, his voice firm but quiet. "I'm not giving him money." He turned his chair to face the city skyline, his reflection ghostly in the glass. "I'm giving him what they took." Jasmine Carter's investigation led her to the bank the following day. The protesters had thinned somewhat, but news vans still lined the street. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, employees speaking in hushed tones as they served the reduced number of customers. Kendra Miles initially refused to speak with Jasmine, citing the ongoing internal review. But Jasmine was persistent, waiting in the lobby until Kendra's lunch break. 5 minutes, Kendra said stiffly as they sat at a cafe across from the bank. And everything is off the record. Why was Mr. Brown treated that way? Jasmine asked, directly. Kendra's professional facade cracked slightly. Our systems flagged the transaction. I followed protocol. Protocol requires public humiliation? That wasn't the intention, Kendra replied defensively. The situation escalated. Did you know Mr. Brown personally? Had you ever seen him at the bank before? Something shifted in Kendra's eyes at the question. She hesitated just a beat too long. No. As I said, I was following protocol for flagged transactions, but Jasmine had caught the hesitation. Ms. Miles, my research shows you grew up in the same neighborhood as Elijah Brown. Is that correct? Kendra's composure slipped further. This interview is over, she said, gathering her things. Any further questions need to go through our corporate communications department. That evening, in her small apartment, Kendra Miles sat on the edge of her bed, a shoebox open beside her. Inside were childhood mementos, report cards, birthday cards, and photographs. She carefully lifted out a faded photo of a young black girl standing proudly beside an older man who was fixing her family's front door. 10-year-old Kendra beamed at the camera, while Elijah Brown worked in the background, tools spread around him. The door had been broken during a break-in that her single mother couldn't afford to repair properly. Elijah had shown up one Saturday morning with his toolbox and fixed it without being asked, refusing payment. A secure home isn't a luxury. It's a necessity, he'd told her mother. Anyone who says different has never felt unsafe in their own house. Kendra traced the outline of Elijah's figure in the photograph, tears welling in her eyes as shame and conflict warred within her. Meanwhile, Luis Santiago sat in his small studio apartment, replaying the events of that day in his mind. He'd been working at the bank for just 3 weeks, his first real job after community college. The security position was supposed to be a stepping stone, a way to save money for police academy. But now he found himself questioning everything. The look in Elijah Brown's eyes as he was escorted out had haunted Luis for days. It wasn't anger or even hurt. It was something worse. Resignation. As if Elijah had always known this moment would come eventually. Luis opened his laptop and navigated to the video that someone had recorded from the street. His own discreetly, captured footage still safely hidden in his phone. The comment section was filled with outrage, calls for boycotts, and demands for justice. His finger hovered over the keyboard. He had more. The full security footage showed exactly what had happened inside the bank. But sharing it would certainly cost him his job, and possibly make him legally liable. Was truth worth the risk? Luis closed his laptop without deciding, but the weight of his silence was becoming harder to bear with each passing day. Across town, Andre Brown retrieved a dusty cardboard box from a storage closet in his penthouse. The label, written in his teenage handwriting, read, "Dad's Workshop." He hadn't opened it in decades. Inside were remnants of his former life. A small hammer his father had given him for his 10th birthday, a dog-eared book on woodworking, photographs of projects they'd completed together. At the bottom, wrapped in an old cloth, was a hand-carved wooden nameplate. Andre remembered making it when he was 12. The hours of careful sanding, the precision of each letter, the pride in his father's eyes when he presented the finished product. The nameplate read, "Brown and Son." It had been meant for the workshop his father had dreamed of opening someday, a place where they would work together, building furniture and passing skills from one generation to the next. But life had taken Andre in a different direction, away from his father's modest dreams and toward his own ambitious ones. He ran his fingers over the carved letters, feeling the craftsmanship his young hands had managed under his father's guidance. Then he reached for his phone and made a call. "It's me," he said, his voice steady and determined. "I want the bank, all of it." Stephen Blake paced his corner office, phone pressed to his ear, face flushed with anger. "I don't care what the PR team thinks is best," he snapped. This needs to disappear and fast. No, absolutely not. We are not issuing a personal apology. That would be admitting liability. As regional director of Hampton and First National Bank, Stephen had built his reputation on efficiency and results. At 48, his salt and pepper hair and tailored suits projected trustworthiness, but behind closed doors, he was known for his ruthless approach. Listen carefully, he continued, lowering his voice. I want all surveillance footage from Tuesday purged. All of it. If anyone asks, we'll say it's standard procedure. And get Miles in my office. Now. Hanging up, Stephen straightened his tie and took a deep breath. The viral video of Elijah Brown had created a firestorm he hadn't anticipated. This needed to be contained. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Come in, he called. Kendra Miles entered, her posture stiff. You wanted to see me, sir? Sit down, Miles. Tell me exactly what happened with this Elijah Brown situation, and don't give me the sanitized version you fed to corporate. Before Kendra could answer, Stephen's assistant burst in without knocking. Sir, we have a problem. The tech team says they can't find the footage from Tuesday. It's missing from the system. Stephen's eyes narrowed as he looked at Kendra. Missing? What does that mean? Someone must have downloaded it before it could be deleted, the assistant explained nervously. They're checking access logs now. Stephen dismissed his assistant, with a sharp nod before turning back to Kendra. Find out who has that footage, and make sure they understand the consequences of making it public. Meanwhile, in a sleek downtown office, Andre Brown, still known as D. Westfield, met with his legal team. What have you found? Andre asked, his voice calm despite the intensity in his eyes. Sarah Wilson, his chief legal counsel, slid a folder across the table. Hampton and First has a history of questionable practices. They've closed branches in predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods while opening new ones in affluent white areas. That's not unusual for banks, Andre pointed out. What else? Michael Dorian, his financial investigator, pulled up a chart. Their overdraft policies are where things get interesting. They process transactions from largest to smallest, maximizing the number of overdraft fees. And guess which branches see the highest percentage of these fees? The ones in minority neighborhoods, Andre finished, a muscle tightening in his jaw. Exactly, Michael confirmed. They're effectively using lower-income customers to subsidize services for wealthier ones. Andre stood and walked to the window. Find me everything. Every loophole they've exploited, every community they've abandoned, every customer they've taken advantage of. I want to know Hampton and First better than they know themselves. The next morning, a man in plain clothes entered the bank's lobby. No one recognized Andre Brown as he observed operations, noting the security cameras, the teller interactions, and the customer treatment patterns. After 20 minutes, Andre approached a wall of awards. Among them was a faded Customer Appreciation Award with a photo of a younger Elijah Brown. The plaque read, "In recognition of 10 years of loyal patronage, 2009. Andre noted that the award had been moved to a less prominent position, partially hidden behind newer accolades. That evening, Kendra sat at her kitchen table, dinner growing cold. Her husband, James, watched her with concern. You've barely said 2 words since you got home, he said gently. Is it still the situation at work? Kendra looked up, conflict evident in her eyes. I knew him, James. I knew Mr. Brown. The man from the video? How? When I was 10, our front door was broken after a break-in. Mom couldn't afford to fix it. Mr. Brown came over one Saturday and repaired it for free. Her voice softened. He spent hours making sure it was secure, even added a peephole at the right height for me and Mom. James reached across the table and took her hand. You never told me that. I didn't recognize him right away at the bank, Kendra continued. But his name, when I heard his full name, something clicked. And then when that woman started implying he was a thief, she broke off, tears threatening. Why didn't you say something? Kendra's expression hardened. And risk my job, the promotion I've worked years for? I have loans to pay, my mother's medical bills. I can't afford principals right now. Across town, Luis Santiago sat in his car outside a coffee shop, watching Jasmine Carter work at a corner table. He'd contacted her anonymously, offering information about what happened at the bank. But now, with the flash drive in his pocket, doubt crept in. Was this worth losing his job? The memory of Elijah Brown's dignified face as he was escorted out provided his answer. Luis entered the coffee shop, ordered a drink, and sat next to Jasmine. Without making eye contact, he whispered, "I have what you're looking for. Don't look at me." Jasmine, professional that she was, didn't react beyond a slight nod. "How do I know it's legitimate?" she asked quietly. "Because I was there. I'm the security guard who escorted him out." "Why are you doing this?" Luis placed the flash drive on the table and slid it toward her. "Because he didn't deserve that. And because the bank is trying to erase what happened." The next day, Jasmine received an encrypted email. "Let's talk about justice. 7 p.m. Edison Hotel lobby." After taking safety precautions, Jasmine arrived at the hotel at 7. The lobby was busy with travelers, making it ideal for a discreet meeting. "Ms. Carter?" A deep voice came from behind her. "Thank you for coming." She turned to find a tall, distinguished-looking man in a tailored suit. There was something vaguely familiar about him. "I'm afraid you have the advantage," she replied cautiously. "You can call me D," he said, taking the seat across from her. "I have information about Hampton and First National Bank." "Why come to me? Your reporting has integrity, and you seem genuinely interested in justice for Elijah Brown." D handed her a folder. "Inside you'll find documentation of systematic discrimination in Hampton and First's lending practices. They've denied home loans to qualified minority applicants at 3 times the rate of white applicants with identical credit profiles." Jasmine scanned the documents. "How did you get this information?" "Let's just say I have access to data most people don't," D replied. "Use it how you see fit. All I ask is that you follow where it leads." "Why do you care about this?" Jasmine asked. "What's your stake?" D's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "Let's just say I believe in accountability." He stood to leave, then added, "You might want to look into Kendra Miles's background. She received a scholarship from the Walker Foundation in 2006. Meanwhile, Stephen Blake met privately with investor William Hargrove to discuss selling the bank quickly before the scandal deepened. "We need to accelerate the timeline," Stephen said. "Get the paperwork ready and make the announcement before any more damage is done." "There might be a complication," Hargrove replied. "Someone's been quietly buying up shares through a shell company. Almost 8% now." Stephen froze. "Who?" "That's just it. We don't know. Very well hidden." Before Stephen could respond, his phone buzzed with a message. "Urgent. Board emergency meeting called for tomorrow morning." That evening, Jasmine investigated Dee's tip about the Walker Foundation scholarship. The foundation had been established in 2002 by an anonymous donor to fund college scholarships for underprivileged students. Kendra Miles had indeed been one of its recipients. The foundation's legal firm was the same one that represented D. Westfield. Further research revealed that D. Westfield had appeared on the business scene roughly 20 years ago, seemingly out of nowhere. Before that, nothing. A theory formed in Jasmine's mind. The timing of Andre Brown's disappearance and D. Westfield's emergence aligned perfectly. Could they be the same person? The next morning, Hampton and First's board members gathered in the conference room. Stephen sat at the head of the table, projecting confidence despite his unease. "I understand there are concerns about the recent incident," Stephen began. "I want to assure everyone that we're handling it." The door opened, and a man entered, the same man who had met with Jasmine. "I apologize for being late," he said smoothly, taking a seat at the opposite end of the table. Stephen stared in confusion. "Excuse me, this is a private meeting." The stranger smiled slightly. "Actually, as of yesterday, I am a board member." He nodded to the secretary. "Please distribute the documentation." As folders circulated, stunned murmurs filled the room. The newcomer continued. "Through my holding company, I now own 28% of Hampton and First National Bank's shares, making me the largest single shareholder." Stephen's face drained of color. "This is impossible." I've also submitted a formal offer to purchase the remaining shares at a 30% premium over market value, the man continued. You'll find the details in Section 3. The board chairman adjusted his glasses as he reviewed the offer. This is most irregular, Mr. Westfield, but I must admit the offer is extremely generous. Generous? Stephen sputtered. It's predatory. We can't allow some outsider to swoop in and— I think what Mr. Blake means, the chairman interrupted diplomatically, is that we need time to properly evaluate this proposal. D. Westfield leaned forward. Of course, take all the time you need. But I should mention that I'm also prepared to take my concerns about certain banking practices to federal regulators if we can't reach an agreement. Stephen glared at the interloper. Who are you, really? What's your game? D. Westfield calmly removed his glasses and met Stephen's gaze directly. The room fell silent as recognition dawned, not of the billionaire D. Westfield, but of his resemblance to a certain elderly man whose humiliation had gone viral. My name, he said deliberately, is Andre Brown. You treated my father like a criminal, and now I own the bank you tried to humiliate him in. Elijah Brown sat in his armchair, remote in hand, as the morning news broke the story. Billionaire. Tech mogul D. Westfield, now revealed to be Andre Brown, has purchased controlling interest in Hampton and First National Bank following viral incident involving his father. The screen showed Andre leaving bank headquarters, powerful and confident. In an expensive suit, Elijah barely recognized the boy he'd raised. Andre, he whispered, his voice catching. The reporter continued. Sources say Brown, who has operated under the name D. Westfield for his entire business career, initiated the purchase after seeing viral footage of his father being escorted from the bank under suspicions of fraud. Elijah switched off the television, hands trembling. After 30 years of silence, his son had reappeared, not with a phone call or visit, but with a grand gesture splashed across the news. Pride and anger warred within him. Pride that his son had achieved such success. Anger that he'd chosen to use his wealth this way, making their private pain public. Throwing his name around, Elijah muttered. Just like his mother said he would. 3 days later, Andre arrived at Elijah's house. Reporters scrambled for position as he stepped from his car, dressed casually but still exuding wealth. He stood for a moment, staring at the modest home where he'd grown up. It looked smaller than he remembered. The paint faded, but immaculately maintained. His father's careful handiwork evident in every repair. Andre knocked, then waited, heart pounding with an anxiety he hadn't felt in decades. The door opened, and father and son stood face to face for the first time in 30 years. Elijah looked older, frailer than Andre had expected, yet his posture remained proud, his gaze unflinching. May I come in? Andre asked, his confident business voice failing him. Elijah stepped aside wordlessly, allowing his son to enter. Inside, time seemed to have stood still. The same furniture, though reupholstered. Family photos on the wall, including several. Of Andre, ending with his high school graduation picture. They sat across from each other, silence stretching between them. You look well, Elijah finally said, his deep voice steady despite the emotions beneath. So do you, Andre replied, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. Why did you do it? Elijah asked. Buying the bank? Making a spectacle? Andre leaned forward. They humiliated you. So you humiliated them back? With money and power? Elijah shook his head. That's not what I taught you. No, you taught me to turn the other cheek, to accept injustice with dignity. Andre's voice took on an edge. Meanwhile, they keep taking and taking. And what have you taken, Andre, in your rise to billions? Elijah's gaze was penetrating. Have you always been fair? Always been kind? Always remembered where you came from? Andre had no answer. You abandoned our values, Elijah continued quietly. Abandoned your name. Abandoned me. I didn't forget them, Andre finally responded. I just lived them differently. You taught me to build things that last, to work hard, to help others. I've done that, just on a different scale than you imagined. And your mother's name? My name? Were they too small scale for your vision too? The question struck Andre like a physical blow. Before he could respond, Elijah rose and walked to a bookshelf, returning with a stack of business magazines. These came every month, he said, placing them on the coffee table. Different name, but I knew my son's face. He tapped one cover featuring D. Westfield. I followed your success, prayed for you every night, even when you couldn't bear to claim me as your father. Meanwhile, Stephen Blake compiled a dossier on Andre Brown's early career, the corners cut, the ethical gray areas navigated, the competitors eliminated on his path to success. If he wants war, he'll get one, Stephen muttered, forwarding the information to media contacts. Let's see how the public feels about their crusading hero when they learn how he built his empire. At the bank, Kendra Miles sat in her office, staring at her phone. She'd received calls from Stephen pressuring her to denounce Andre's takeover, from her mother asking if the rumors about D. Westfield were true, and from a national news program requesting an interview. Jasmine Carter appeared in her doorway, recorder in hand. Ms. Miles, Jasmine said, I think it's time we talked about your connection to the Brown family. Kendra's heart raced. I don't know what you mean. You received a scholarship from Andre Brown's foundation, Jasmine stated. And before that, Elijah Brown fixed your family's door. You knew exactly who he was that day at the bank. The weight of truth finally broke through Kendra's professional facade. She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. I was afraid, she admitted. Afraid of losing everything I'd worked for. But I've been more afraid every day since, living with what I did. That evening, ignoring Stephen's threats, Kendra agreed to a national news interview. Live on camera, she confessed. Elijah Brown was more than just a customer, she said, her voice steady despite her nervousness. When I was a child, he helped my family when no one else would. He's a good man who was treated terribly by the institution I represent. For my part in that, I am deeply sorry. She took a breath before continuing. Mr. Brown taught me something, as a child that I forgot as an adult, that integrity matters more than ambition. He is the man who saved my family, and I failed him when he needed someone to stand up for him. Across the city, viewers watched in stunned silence. Social media erupted, and at his desk, Stephen Blake cursed as his phone lit up with messages from angry board members. The next morning, Jasmine's exposé was published. The quiet man who built a community, the untold story of Elijah Brown. The article chronicled Elijah's decades of small kindnesses, the wheelchair ramps built for neighbors, the doors fixed for single mothers, the carpentry lessons for neighborhood boys, the quiet dignity with which he'd raised his son alone after his wife's death. He never asked for recognition, one neighbor was quoted saying. He just saw what needed doing and did it. The contrast between Elijah's lifetime of quiet service and the bank's treatment of him couldn't have been starker. Public pressure mounted as protests spread nationwide. Customers began closing their accounts in droves. For Elijah himself, the attention was more mortifying than vindicating. I just want to go to the store without people taking pictures, he told Andre during one of their increasingly frequent conversations. I'm not a hero or a martyr. I'm just an old man who wanted to cash his check. 3 days after Kendra's television appearance, Luis Santiago held a press conference on the steps of City Hall. My name is Luis Santiago. I was the security guard who escorted Mr. Elijah Brown from Hampton and First National Bank. I am here today to publicly apologize to him and to acknowledge my part in this injustice. Luis looked up from his paper, his voice growing stronger. Mr. Brown never raised his voice, never made demands. He just asked to be treated with the respect he'd earned through 20 years of loyalty. In failing to stand up for him, I failed my own values. Luis's voice broke slightly. Mr. Brown taught me courage without saying a word. His dignity in the face of disrespect showed me what real strength looks like. A reporter asked Luis about his employment status. I was fired the day after I provided the security footage to Ms. Carter, Luis answered honestly, but I'd make the same choice again. Unknown to Luis, Andre was watching the press conference and immediately instructed his assistant to offer Luis a position at triple his former salary. That evening, Andre visited his father again. Their conversations were becoming less strained, though 30 years of absence couldn't be bridged quickly. "I spoke with Mom today," Andre said as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. Elijah looked surprised. "You mean at the cemetery?" Andre nodded. "First time since the funeral. I should have gone sooner." "She would understand," Elijah said softly. "She always did." "After she died," Andre began, then stopped, emotion tightening his throat. "After she died, I couldn't bear to see you in pain. You stopped talking, stopped laughing. The house felt like a tomb. And I needed to escape," Elijah finished. "I know, son. I was so lost in my own grief. I couldn't see yours." For the first time since Andre's return, both men's eyes filled with tears. "I was wrong to leave the way I did," Andre admitted. "Wrong to change my name. Wrong to pretend I came from nowhere instead of from you." Elijah reached out a weathered hand and placed it on his son's shoulder. "And I was wrong to let you go without a fight. Wrong to let pride keep me from finding you. Wrong to let grief silence me when you needed me to speak." A week later, Elijah attended a ceremony at the bank. The old Hampton and First National sign had been removed. In its place hung a new name, Brown Community Bank. Elijah walked through the front doors, not as a customer this time, but as the honorary chairman, flanked by his son and Kendra Miles. The lobby, once a site of humiliation, had been transformed into a space of redemption. The morning sun cast long shadows over the crowd gathered outside the bank's main branch. Workers carefully removed the Hampton and First National Bank sign that had adorned the building for decades. As the last letter came down, a cheer rose from the onlookers. Andre Brown stood at the front of the crowd, his father Elijah at his side. Though still frail from the stress of recent weeks, Elijah stood tall, leaning only slightly on his handcrafted cane. His eyes, however, betrayed his discomfort with the spectacle. "Ladies and gentlemen," Andre addressed the crowd, his voice carrying the practiced confidence of a seasoned CEO. "Today marks a new beginning for this institution and for our community." Workers unveiled the new sign, Brown Community Bank. Andre turned to his father. "This isn't a favor," he said, loud enough for nearby reporters to hear. "It's justice." Elijah's expression remained stoic, though those who knew him well could see the complex emotions playing across his face. Pride mingled with unease at the public attention. Inside the bank's executive floor, the transition was less celebratory. Several mid-level managers who had been loyal to Stephen Blake gathered in a conference room speaking in hushed tones. "He's going to run this place into the ground," said Thomas Reed, the loan department head. "All this talk about community first and banking with a conscience, it's just PR. The balance sheets will tell the real story in a few months." Patricia Daniels, operations manager, nodded in agreement. "I heard he's planning to forgive predatory loans. Can you imagine? We'll be bankrupt within a year." "Then we make sure that happens," Reed replied, his voice dropping even lower. "Blake still has connections. If this place fails under Brown's leadership, the board will have no choice but to reconsider the sale." What they didn't know was that Kendra Miles was passing by the open door, catching enough of their conversation to understand their intent. Meanwhile, Elijah was taking a more hands-on approach than anyone had anticipated. Rather than serving as a figurehead, he insisted on meeting families who had been turned away by the old bank, especially minorities and seniors, to understand their needs firsthand. In a small conference room, Elijah sat across from the Williams family, Robert, Sarah, and their teenage son, Michael. Robert worked 2 jobs, Sarah was a nurse, and they had been trying to secure a home loan for 3 years without success. Hampton and First kept changing the requirements, Sarah explained, frustration evident in her voice. Every time we met one condition, they'd add another. Eventually, we just gave up. Elijah nodded, taking notes in a small leather-bound notebook. His handwriting was precise and deliberate, just like his carpentry. "And your credit score?" he asked. "750, Robert answered. Never missed a payment on anything. Elijah looked up, his eyes kind but serious. Then why do you think they kept denying you? The couple exchanged glances. It was their son who finally spoke up. Because we're black, sir. The bank on the other side of town doesn't have these problems. Elijah nodded again, making another note. Thank you for your honesty, and thank you for giving this bank another chance. After the Williams family left, Andre entered the conference room. That's the 5th family today, Dad. You need to rest. Elijah closed his notebook. What I need is to understand. Numbers on a page won't tell you why people lost faith in this place. We have people for that. Market research, focus groups. Son, Elijah interrupted gently. Some things you need to hear with your own ears. These people aren't data points. They're neighbors. Across town at the Daily Chronicle, Jasmine Carter was working on her second story about the bank's transformation. Her desk was covered with notes from interviews with former and current employees, financial records, and community feedback. Her editor, Robert Nichols, approached with a concerned expression. You've been getting some interesting emails, he said, placing a printout in front of her. Jasmine scanned the page. It was an anonymous message with a clear threat. Drop the bank story, or your career ends here. Some powerful people don't like having their methods exposed. She looked up at Nichols, who was watching her reaction carefully. Are you telling me to back off? She asked. I'm telling you to be careful, he replied. This isn't just about a viral video anymore. You're digging into decades of financial practices that made a lot of powerful people very rich. Jasmine thought for a moment, then stood up, grabbing her recorder and notebook. Then I better make sure my research is bulletproof. At the newly renamed bank, Kendra Miles requested a meeting with Andre. She found him in what had been Stephen Blake's office, now stripped of its ostentatious decor and redesigned with simple, elegant furnishings. I overheard something you should know about, she said after closing the door. Some of the managers are planning to sabotage the bank from the inside. Andre didn't seem surprised. We expected resistance. This is more than resistance, Kendra insisted. They're talking about deliberately tanking loan portfolios, spreading fear among account holders. They want the bank to fail under your leadership. Andre studied her for a moment. Why are you telling me this? A month ago, you were part of the system that humiliated my father. Kendra met his gaze directly. Because I'm trying to be worthy of the second chance you gave me. And because what they're planning would hurt the same people your father helped all those years. People like my family. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock. Andre's assistant entered, looking uncomfortable. Sir, there's someone here to see you. He says he's an old friend. Arthur Penn? Andre's expression shifted subtly. Send him in. Arthur Penn entered with the confidence of a man comfortable in expensive surroundings. In his mid-60s, he moved with the deliberate grace of someone who had navigated boardrooms and power lunches for decades. Andre, he said warmly, arms outstretched. Or should I call you D. Westfield? I'm never sure these days. Andre rose but didn't return the embrace. Arthur, this is unexpected. I heard about your new acquisition. Arthur glanced around the office appraisingly. Quite a change from tech startups to community banking. Kendra, would you excuse us? Andre asked. After she left, he gestured for Arthur to sit. What brings you here, Arthur? Arthur settled into a chair, unbuttoning his suit jacket. Can't an old mentor check in on his protege? Especially when said protege is making waves in new waters. You never do anything without a reason, Andre replied coolly. Arthur chuckled. You learned well. His expression grew more serious. The truth is, I'm concerned. Banking is a delicate ecosystem. Your approach might be viewed as disruptive by important players. You mean predatory lenders and those who profit from them. I mean people who don't like their boats rocked. Arthur leaned forward slightly. You've made impressive strides, Andre. From that hungry kid I took under my wing to a tech billionaire. But big players don't like your kind rewriting the rules. Kind. Andre's voice was dangerously quiet. Arthur waved a dismissive hand. Self-made men with chips on their shoulders. It makes the old guard nervous. He stood to leave. Just a friendly warning from someone who's navigated these waters longer than you. After Arthur left, Andre remained at his desk, troubled by the visit. Arthur Penn had indeed been his mentor when he first entered the business world, teaching him connections, introductions, strategies. But there had always been something calculating beneath the avuncular facade. The intercom buzzed. "Sir, your father is asking for you. He's in the community meeting room." Andre found Elijah sitting alone, reviewing his notes from the day's meetings. The old man looked tired but energized in a way Andre hadn't seen in their recent interactions. "These people have stories that would break your heart," Elijah said without looking up. "But they're still here, still trying. Reminds me of your mother." Andre sat across from his father. "I had a visitor today, Arthur Penn." "The man who took you under his wing when you left home?" Elijah finally looked up. Andre was surprised. "You know about him?" "I told you, son. I followed your career even when you changed your name." Arthur Penn was mentioned in every early profile of the mysterious D. Westfield. Elijah closed his notebook. "What did he want?" "To warn me, I think, though about what exactly wasn't clear." Elijah's expression grew thoughtful. "Be careful of that one. Men who speak in circles usually have something to hide." Later that afternoon, Kendra presented her proposal to the board, a program to identify and forgive predatory loans made under Stephen Blake's leadership. The boardroom was tense as she outlined the financial implications. "This is unprecedented," said Walter Pierce, the elderly board chairman. The shareholders approved a change in direction when they accepted Mr. Brown's offer," Kendra interjected politely but firmly. "This program would affect approximately 3.2% of our loan portfolio, but would generate immeasurable goodwill in communities that have been historically exploited by this institution." Several board members exchanged skeptical glances. Thomas Reed, who had been plotting with other managers earlier, spoke up. "This is financial suicide. We have a fiduciary duty." "If I may," Elijah's deep voice cut through the tension as he entered the boardroom. Though not officially part of these proceedings, his presence commanded immediate respect. "Mr. Brown," Walter acknowledged with a nod. "We weren't expecting you." "I've been listening to stories all day," Elijah said, taking a seat at the table. "Stories of families who did everything right but were still denied fair treatment by this bank." He opened his notebook. "The Williams family, denied a home loan despite a 750 credit score. The Andersons, charged overdraft fees when the bank deliberately held their deposits. Mrs. Patterson, an 81-year-old widow whose reverse mortgage terms were changed without proper notification." He closed the notebook and looked around the table. "I'm not a banker, never claimed to be, but I know what's right. And I know Ms. Miles here is proposing something that would begin to make amends for real harm done to real people." The room fell silent. Finally, Walter Pierce cleared his throat. "Well, I suppose we could run a small pilot program." "A full implementation," Elijah insisted gently. "Sometimes doing the right thing costs something. That's what makes it valuable." When the board voted moments later, Kendra's proposal passed by a narrow margin. Across town, in a luxury penthouse apartment, Stephen Blake sat across from a young man with disheveled hair and a worn hoodie, a sharp contrast to Stephen's crisp suit. "You understand what I'm asking?" Stephen slid a thumb drive across the glass coffee table. The young man, Jason Harris, a former IT specialist Stephen had fired years earlier for whistleblowing, picked up the drive. "You want me to leak evidence of D. Westfield's early business practices, transactions that were technically legal but ethically gray." "The public loves their crusading hero," Stephen said with a sneer. "They should know he built his fortune on the same practices he now condemns." Jason turned the drive in his fingers. "And what's in this for me, besides the considerable risk?" Stephen smiled thinly. "Besides the generous payment we discussed? The satisfaction of exposing a hypocrite." After Jason left, Stephen made a phone call. "It's done. The material should hit the internet in the next 48 hours. Is our other arrangement proceeding?" The voice on the other end, Arthur Penn's, replied smoothly. "Everything is in place. Young Mr. Brown is about to learn a painful lesson about challenging the established order. Luis Santiago's new office at Andre's tech company offered a view of the city skyline that still took his breath away. From security guard to director of security had been a dizzying promotion, but Luis was determined to prove himself worthy of the opportunity. He was reviewing surveillance protocols when his assistant knocked. "Mr. Santiago, you need to see this." She handed him a tablet displaying security footage of a black sedan circling Elijah Brown's neighborhood repeatedly over the past 3 days. The license plates were obscured. "Have we identified the vehicle?" Luis asked, studying the footage. "Not yet, sir. The plates appear to be deliberately muddied, but it's made the same circuit at the same times for 3 consecutive days." Luis frowned. "Increase patrols around Mr. Brown's home, discreetly, and get me everything you can on this vehicle." Across town, Jasmine Carter arrived at her apartment to find an envelope had been slipped under her door. Inside was a burned photograph of Elijah's house with a handwritten note. "Undo this or watch everything burn again." Her hands trembling slightly, she immediately called the number Andre had given her for emergencies. Within 30 minutes, Luis Santiago was at her door. "You received the same threat," Luis observed after she showed him the envelope. "The same? You mean, Mr. Brown received an identical message yesterday. We didn't make it public to avoid causing panic." Jasmine's journalistic instincts kicked in. "This isn't just about the bank anymore, is it? Someone's personally targeting Elijah, and anyone connected to him." Luis's expression was grim. "It seems that way. We're investigating, but whoever's behind this is being extremely cautious." "Stephen Blake," Jasmine said. "He has the most to lose from the bank's transformation." "We thought so too initially," Luis replied. "But this feels bigger somehow, more coordinated." The next morning, Andre was blindsided by breaking news across all major networks. Tech billionaire D. Westfield's rise built on questionable practices. The story featured leaked documents showing that early in his career, Andre had exploited legal loopholes to outmaneuver competitors, used aggressive tax strategies, and once acquired a struggling company only to dismantle it for its intellectual property, leaving employees jobless. The public reaction was swift and harsh. Fake reformer began trending on social media. Protesters who had once supported the bank's transformation now questioned Andre's motives. Several influential business publications ran editorials asking whether Brown Community Bank was simply a PR stunt by a billionaire trying to launder his reputation. Andre sat in his office, watching the coverage with a stony expression. These were indeed his actions from decades ago, actions he wasn't proud of, but which had been common practice in the cutthroat tech industry of the time. His assistant entered cautiously. "Sir, there's been a filing with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Someone's claiming whistleblower status, alleging that you used insider information in the bank acquisition." Andre closed his eyes briefly. "Who?" "The filing is anonymous, but the law firm representing the whistleblower is Frost, Taylor, and Penn." "Penn," Andre repeated softly. "Arthur Penn." Meanwhile, Elijah had retreated to his workshop behind his modest home. The small shed had been his sanctuary for decades, a place where wood became useful, beautiful things under his patient hands. He was working on a bench made from reclaimed timber salvaged from an old church that had been demolished the previous year. The wood was scarred and weathered, but Elijah saw potential in its imperfections. Each knot and grain told a story of time and endurance. The rhythmic motion of sanding calmed his mind as he processed all that had happened. The bank that had humiliated him now bore his name. His long-lost son had returned as a powerful but controversial figure. And somehow, Elijah himself had become a symbol, something that made him profoundly uncomfortable. As he worked, he thought about what he wanted this bench to represent: a place for people to rest, to be seen, to belong. Not a grand monument or an ostentatious display, but something useful, dignified, and welcoming. Everything the bank had failed to be on that rainy Tuesday. Across town, in the newly renovated boardroom of Brown Community Bank, a power struggle was unfolding. Arthur Penn had somehow convinced several board members to call an emergency session to discuss concerns about the new direction. "The shareholders are nervous," Arthur said smoothly, standing at the head of the table where Andre usually sat. "The recent revelations about Mr. Brown's past business practices, coupled with the radical changes to loan policies, have created a crisis of confidence." Walter Pierce, who had begun to warm to Elijah's vision for the bank, frowned. "Mr. Penn, you're not even a shareholder. Why are you leading this discussion?" "I represent concerned parties who prefer to remain anonymous," Arthur replied, "and I'm here to offer a solution that protects everyone's interests." Kendra Miles, who had remained silent, finally spoke up. "You mean Stephen Blake's interests? And your own?" She stood, commanding the room's attention. "Before we continue this farce, the board should know that Mr. Penn has been working with Stephen Blake to orchestrate the recent media attacks against Andre Brown." Arthur's composure slipped momentarily. "That's a serious accusation, Ms. Miles." "It's a fact," Kendra countered, sliding folders across the table to each board member. "Inside, you'll find evidence of meetings between Mr. Penn, Mr. Blake, and a hacker named Jason Harris, who was responsible for leaking the selective information about Mr. Brown's past. You'll also find documentation of Mr. Penn's connections to predatory lending operations that specifically targeted minority communities, including the very neighborhood where Elijah Brown lives." The boardroom erupted in chaos as members flipped through the documents. Arthur attempted to regain control, but Walter Pierce raised his hand for silence. "Mr. Penn," the elderly chairman said firmly, "I think you should leave." Now, after the boardroom coup attempt failed, Jasmine Carter received an anonymous email containing financial records connecting Arthur Penn to a network of high-interest loan companies that had operated in Elijah's neighborhood decades earlier. One company, Eagle Financial, had been responsible for a foreclosure wave that claimed the homes of several of Elijah's friends, including a man named William Porter, who had died of a heart attack the day after losing his home. Jasmine immediately began verifying the information, cross-referencing public records and tracking the complex web of shell companies that led back to Arthur Penn. Meanwhile, Luis Santiago had made a breakthrough in his investigation of the threatening notes. Working with a contact at a private security firm, he traced the distinctive paper to a specialty stationery shop in Arizona that catered to wealthy clients. The shop's sales records showed a recent purchase by a company owned by none other than Arthur Penn. Luis and Jasmine flew to Arizona to confront the shop owner and gather final proof of the connection. As their flight landed, Luis noticed a dark sedan following their taxi from the airport. Hours later, as they left the stationery shop with the owner's signed statement, two men in suits approached them. "Mr. Santiago, Ms. Carter, you need to come with us," one said, flashing a badge too quickly to identify. "On what grounds?" Luis asked, already reaching for his phone. "Trespassing and harassment," the man replied. "The shop owner has filed a complaint." Luis and Jasmine exchanged glances, knowing this was false. They'd just left the owner on perfectly amicable terms. But before they could protest further, they were escorted to the sedan Luis had noticed earlier. It became clear this was no legitimate arrest when they were taken to an empty office building rather than a police station. Their phones were confiscated, and they were placed in separate rooms. "Someone is pulling serious strings," Jasmine whispered to Luis before they were separated. "This is about what we found. We're getting too close." Hours later, after Luis had managed to activate the emergency beacon hidden in his watch, standard protocol for Andre's security team, they were suddenly released without explanation. Their phones were returned, but all photos and recordings from the stationery shop had been deleted. When they returned to their hotel, Jasmine found a new message on her laptop. "Back off, or next time won't be just a warning." Back in the city, Elijah attended a Sunday service at his longtime church, Grace Baptist. The pastor had asked him to say a few words about forgiveness and redemption, themes that had become unexpectedly relevant to Elijah's life. As he stood to approach the pulpit, a sharp pain radiated through his chest. The stress of recent weeks, combined with his age, had finally taken its toll. Elijah clutched at the pew in front of him, his vision blurring as he collapsed to the floor. The congregation erupted in concerned shouts as someone called an ambulance. Within minutes, Elijah was being rushed to Memorial Hospital, his condition serious but stable. Andre was in a meeting when he received the call. Without a word of explanation, he bolted from the room and drove directly to the hospital, all thoughts of business and scandal forgotten in the face of potentially losing his father, just as they were beginning to reconcile. He found Elijah in a private room, pale but conscious, an oxygen tube in his nose and monitors beeping steadily beside him. The old man's eyes were closed, but they fluttered open as Andre entered. "They tell me it was just a warning," Elijah said weakly. "Not a full heart attack." Andre took his father's hand, shocked at how fragile it felt. "You scared me." "Been doing that since you were a boy," Elijah replied with a faint smile. "Always getting into something." Andre sat beside the bed, still holding his father's hand. For a while they sat in silence, the steady beep of the heart monitor marking time between them. "All this fighting," Elijah finally whispered, his voice barely audible. "Promise me you'll use all you've built for others, not for revenge." Andre looked at his father's weathered face, the face that had once seemed so strong and unbreakable to a young boy. He thought about the threats, Arthur's betrayal, Stephen's schemes, and the public humiliation they'd tried to inflict. "I promise," he said, though his eyes burned with the need to make someone pay for what they'd done to his father. The next morning, as Elijah slept in his hospital room, Andre held a press conference outside the hospital. He intended to address the recent scandals and refocus attention on the bank's community initiatives. But as he approached the microphones, a commotion erupted at the back of the gathered press corps. A man in an expensive suit pushed his way to the front. Marshall Davis, CEO of Premier Financial, one of the city's largest banks, and a known associate of both Stephen Blake and Arthur Penn. "Before Mr. Brown speaks," Davis announced loudly, "the public should know that Brown Community Bank is now under federal investigation for financial misconduct linked to its new owner." Cameras swiveled toward Davis as he continued. "The Securities and Exchange Commission has opened a formal inquiry into Andre Brown's acquisition methods and banking practices. This so-called community champion has built his empire on the same exploitative practices he now condemns." The assembled reporters erupted in questions as Andre stood stunned at the podium, watching as months of careful work threatened to unravel in an instant. Camera flashes exploded as Andre Brown stood frozen at the podium. Marshall Davis's announcement about a federal investigation hung in the air while reporters shouted questions, their voices blending into chaos. "Mr. Brown, is it true your bank is under investigation? Did you use illegal methods to acquire Hampton and First?" Andre raised his hands for quiet. "These allegations are false. There is no federal investigation. This is a desperate attempt by those who profited from predatory banking practices to undermine our reforms." By evening, news outlets nationwide ran the story. Social media buzzed with speculation. People who had celebrated Elijah's vindication now questioned whether his son was any better than those who had humiliated him. Outside Brown Community Bank, protesters gathered with signs reading, "Same wolf, different sheep's clothing," and "Justice." For who? The public opinion that had carried Andre's takeover now threatened to sink him. In his hospital room, Elijah watched the coverage with a heavy heart. The nurse had insisted he avoid stress, but he couldn't turn away from the television. "Turn it off," came a voice from the doorway. Jasmine Carter stood there, notebook in hand. Elijah sighed. "Come to get a quote about my disappointing son?" Jasmine shook her head as she entered. "I'm not here as a reporter right now." She sat beside his bed. "Mr. Brown, everything happening to Andre is connected to what happened to you, and to something much bigger that's been going on for decades." She explained her findings about Arthur Penn's connection to predatory lending companies that had devastated Elijah's neighborhood years ago. "This isn't just about a viral video. It's about power structures that have exploited communities like yours for generations." Elijah absorbed this silently before asking, "What does my son need?" "Time," Jasmine replied, "and someone who still believes in him." Across town, Andre sat alone in his penthouse when his security team announced an unexpected visitor, Arthur Penn. Minutes later, Arthur entered, composed despite the late hour. "I thought you might be drinking," Arthur observed, noting Andre's untouched whiskey. "What do you want?" Andre asked. "To offer you a way out." Arthur sat without invitation. "This situation can still be resolved quietly." "By me stepping down from the bank?" Arthur smiled thinly. "Precisely. Resign your position, issue a statement citing personal reasons, and the investigation rumors disappear." He leaned forward. "Think of it as a strategic retreat. You keep your tech empire and billions. Just walk away from this banking experiment. And, if I refuse? Then the SEC really will open an investigation. Those documents from our Shanghai deal in 2010? They could be very problematic if they surfaced now." Andre felt ice in his veins. The Shanghai deal had been in a legal gray area, not technically illegal, but certainly not something that would withstand scrutiny. "You were part of that deal," Andre pointed out. "But it's not my name on the paperwork, is it?" Arthur replied, smoothly. "You were so eager to prove yourself you insisted on taking full responsibility." Andre remembered. He'd been young, ambitious, desperate to impress Arthur. He'd signed everything they put in front of him. "You have until tomorrow morning to announce your resignation," Arthur said, rising. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry it came to this. You were my most promising protege." After Arthur left, Andre received a text from an unknown number. "Café Noir, 1 hour. Come alone. Bring your phone." LM Luis and Jasmine were already waiting when Andre arrived. Luis immediately took Andre's phone, removed the battery, and placed it in a signal-blocking bag. "We're being watched," Luis explained quietly. "Your penthouse, car, office, all compromised." "How do you know?" Jasmine slid several photographs across the table showing tiny surveillance devices planted in various locations. "After our detention in Arizona, I had a security team sweep all locations," Luis said. "These are high-grade devices, not something an average investigator would use." "Arthur came to see me tonight," Andre told them. "Offered me a deal, step down, and the rumors disappear." "Did you record the conversation?" Jasmine asked. Andre shook his head. "I didn't know my own home was bugged." "But they did," Luis said, placing a small device on the table. "Everything transmitted from your penthouse in the last 6 hours is saved here, including Arthur Penn incriminating himself." The next morning, Andre requested a private meeting with Arthur. Security cameras observed Arthur arriving alone, checking his phone repeatedly, clearly anxious that Andre had missed his deadline. When Andre entered, his expression was unreadable as he sat across from his former mentor. "I've been thinking about your offer," Andre began. "And?" Arthur prompted. "I have a counter-proposal." Andre placed his phone on the table and pressed play. Arthur's voice emerged clearly. "Then the SEC really will open an investigation. Those documents from our Shanghai deal, they could be very problematic if they surface now." The color drained from Arthur's face. "That's illegal recording," he hissed, reaching for the phone. Andre pulled it back. "Actually, it's not my recording. It's yours, from the bugs you planted in my home. Luis Santiago found your receiver. With everything stored on it." Arthur's composure cracked. "What do you want?" "The truth. About everything. The threats against my father, the smear campaign, your connection to Stephen Blake, and your involvement with Eagle Financial 30 years ago in my father's neighborhood." Arthur's eyes widened slightly. "Yes, we know about that too," Andre continued. "About William Porter and the others who lost their homes, and in Porter's case, his life, because of your predatory practices." "That was business," Arthur said, coldly. "Nothing personal." "It was very personal to the families you destroyed." Their conversation was interrupted as Jasmine entered with a cameraman. Arthur stiffened. "You set me up," he snarled. "No, Arthur. You did that yourself decades ago." Live on the local news station's morning broadcast, with viewers across the city watching in stunned silence. Jasmine conducted what would become a landmark interview. Arthur Penn, trapped by his own recorded threats and facing potential criminal charges, broke down and confessed. He admitted to coordinating with Stephen Blake to orchestrate the smear campaign against Andre. He confessed to hiring people to intimidate Elijah. And most damning, he acknowledged his role in the predatory lending practices that had devastated communities of color throughout the city for decades. It wasn't personal, he insisted repeatedly. It was just business. Business that destroyed lives, Jasmine countered. By that afternoon, FBI agents raided Stephen Blake's home and Arthur Penn's offices simultaneously. Both men were taken into custody on multiple charges, including conspiracy, coercion, and financial crimes. Andre, once mocked as a rogue billionaire with a vendetta, was now praised for exposing one of the biggest banking scandals in the region's history. The investigation revealed decades of systematic discrimination, targeting of vulnerable communities, and corruption extending into local government. Meanwhile, Elijah's handcrafted bench was installed outside the main branch of Brown Community Bank. The wooden bench, made from reclaimed church timbers, carried an inscription carved by Elijah's own hands. "For those overlooked, may you always be seen." A small crowd gathered to witness the installation. Andre stood beside his father, supporting his elbow as Elijah was still weak from his hospital stay. When the installation was complete, Elijah was the first to sit on the bench. Andre hesitated, then joined him. Father and son sat side by side in public for the first time in 30 years. "I'm sorry I was a late son," Andre said quietly. Elijah patted his son's hand. "You were always my son. Just lost in your own storm for a while." Cameras captured the image that would appear in newspapers the next day. The elderly man who had been humiliated at a bank, now sitting proudly outside that same institution, his billionaire son beside him, both looking toward a shared future, rather than a divided past. 1 year later, Brown Community Bank had become a model for ethical banking practices across the country. Financial institutions nationwide were being scrutinized for discriminatory policies, with several major banks announcing reform initiatives. Andre had stepped back from day-to-day operations, appointing Kendra Miles as CEO. "You understand both sides of the counter," he had told her. "Run it for the people." Under Kendra's leadership, the bank had expanded its low-interest loan programs for minority businesses, created financial literacy workshops, and hired staff that reflected the diversity of the communities they served. Andre himself had turned his attention to education reform, funding programs under his real name, Brown, not Westfield. The identity he had abandoned decades earlier was now the one he claimed proudly. On a crisp autumn morning, Luis Santiago stood before the first graduating class of the Brown Security Academy, a program he had founded to mentor young people interested in security and justice work. "Today marks not just your graduation," Luis told the 20 young men and women in their uniforms, "but the beginning of a new approach to security, one based on protection and respect rather than intimidation." Thus, the front row, Elijah sat with Andre, both beaming with pride. Though still frail in body, Elijah's spirit had strengthened. He had become a regular visitor at the academy, sharing wisdom with students who initially came for job training but stayed for the life lessons. When Luis invited Elijah to address the graduates, the elderly man made his way to the podium. "I'm not one for speeches," he began, his deep voice still commanding. "But I want you to know something. When Luis first came into my life, he was escorting me out of a bank where I'd been falsely accused." Elijah looked at Luis. "Today, he stands before you as what I call a quiet giant, someone who found the courage to stand for truth, even when it cost him something." Luis blinked back emotion as Elijah continued. "That's what each of you can be in your communities. Not just security officers, but guardians of dignity. Remember that everyone you encounter has a story, has struggles you know nothing about. Treat them all as you would want your own family treated." The graduates gave Elijah a standing ovation. As he returned to his seat, Andre supporting him with a gentle hand. Across town, Kendra sat in the CEO's office that had once belonged to Stephen Blake. The space had been completely redesigned. Gone were the imposing desk and intimidating layout. In their place was a more open arrangement with comfortable seating and walls showcasing artwork from local creators. A knock interrupted her review of quarterly reports. Her assistant announced, "There's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important." The man who entered was in his 60s, well-dressed but with the weathered look of someone who had endured hardship. Kendra didn't recognize him immediately. "Ms. Miles," he said hesitantly. "You probably don't remember me. My name is James Wilson." The name sparked a memory. "You were friends with Elijah years ago," she said, rising to shake his hand. James nodded. "Best friends since childhood, until about 15 years ago. I was imprisoned for check fraud, a desperate act after the old bank's lending policies cost me everything." His eyes held a mixture of shame and pride. "I came to thank you personally. Yesterday I closed on my first home since losing everything. Your second chance mortgage program made it possible," Kendra smiled warmly. "That's wonderful news, Mr. Wilson. Have you told Elijah?" "Not yet. We haven't spoken since before my arrest. Pride kept me away." He looked down. "I thought maybe you could tell me how to reach him." "Actually," Kendra replied, "I think I can. Do better than that." That weekend, Andre pulled up to a modest house in the historic district. It had taken months of searching, but he had finally succeeded in buying back Elijah's childhood home, the place where generations of Browns had lived. Before economic pressures forced the family to sell, Elijah sat in the passenger seat, unaware of their destination. "Where are we going? That's such a big secret," he asked as Andre helped him from the car. When Elijah turned and saw the house, he froze. "Andre, what is this?" "Look closer," Andre said gently. Elijah stepped forward, squinting. The porch had been rebuilt exactly as he remembered from childhood. The unique pattern of the railings, a design his own father had created, had been meticulously reproduced. "How did you—" Elijah's voice trailed off. "I found the original blueprints in city records, and some old photographs your mother had saved." Andre placed keys in his father's trembling hand. "It's yours. For good." Tears filled Elijah's eyes as he climbed the porch steps, his hand running along the railing just as it had when he was a boy. Inside, the house had been restored to honor its history while providing modern comforts. "Son," Elijah managed, his voice thick with emotion, "this is too much." "No," Andre said firmly, "it's not enough. But it's a start." As they toured the house, they found James Wilson waiting in the kitchen, sitting nervously with a bottle of Elijah's favorite sweet tea. The reunion between the old friends was tearful and healing, years of distance melting away as they remembered shared joys and acknowledged shared pain. Later that month, Jasmine's documentary, More Than Money, The Elijah Brown Story, premiered to a packed theater. The film chronicled not just the viral incident, but Elijah's lifetime of quiet service and the larger issues of banking discrimination. As the credits rolled, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Elijah, reluctantly taking the stage with Jasmine and Andre, seemed overwhelmed. "I never wanted to be famous," he said when the applause quieted. "Still don't. But if my story helps people see each other, really see each other, then something good has come from something bad." The documentary would go on to win national awards and be shown in schools across the country, sparking conversations about dignity and financial justice. One evening, as Elijah sorted through boxes in his new home, he found a letter tucked into an old photo album. The envelope was yellowed with age, addressed simply to Dad but never sent. He recognized Andre's teenage handwriting. When Andre visited that weekend, Elijah handed him the letter without comment. Andre opened it, his expression changing from curiosity to pain as he recognized his own words, written at 19. "Dad, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I'm leaving tomorrow and I'm not sure when I'll be back. I can't breathe in this house anymore. Every room reminds me of Mom and of how quiet you've become since she died. I need to find my own way. Maybe then I'll be strong enough to come back and be the son you deserve. Please don't think I don't love you. It's because I love you that I have to go. Your son, Andre." The two men sat on Elijah's porch reading the letter together, finally releasing tears held back for decades. The healing wasn't instantaneous. Real reconciliation never is, but it was genuine and deepening with each day. One sunny afternoon, a young family sat on Elijah's bench outside the bank. The mother was opening a savings account for her daughter. The little girl traced the inscription with her fingers. "For those overlooked, may you always be seen." "What does that mean, Mommy?" she asked. The mother smiled, watching an elderly man approach with a handcrafted walking stick. "It means that man gave people dignity," she explained. "He gave it to your grandpa, too." Elijah nodded politely as he passed, continuing his daily walk. Though he didn't know them personally, he recognized something in their faces, the same hope for a better future that had sustained him through his darkest days. Months later, Elijah stood on the stage at the state capitol, honored with the Citizen Legacy Medal, the highest civilian honor in the state. The audience included people from all walks of his life, neighbors he'd helped, graduates from Luis's academy, Kendra and her team, Jasmine, James Wilson, and Andre in the front row. "I'm not rich in money," Elijah said in his acceptance speech. "I'm rich in what I've lived to see. I've seen hatred, yes, but I've also seen how love outlasts it. I've seen injustice, but I've also seen how truth can bend the arc toward justice." The following morning, Elijah walked past the bank as he did. Each day, the community waved at him, tellers, customers, passers-by. He smiled and nodded in return, touching the bench briefly as he passed. His legacy secure, his family reconnected, his community strengthened. Elijah Brown continued his journey, his cane tapping gently against the sidewalk. Not a symbol, but simply a man who had lived long enough to see the fruits of seeds planted decades before. Did wealth and power ultimately bring justice? Or was it Elijah's lifetime of quiet dignity that truly changed hearts? Sometimes the most powerful statement is not in what we take, but in what we give back to the world around us. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe for more powerful tales of redemption, family, and the quiet heroes among us.